Hello and welcome to today's video. Today's video is for Chapter 8, Section 3, which is the tangent function. So what I'm going to do first is just talk about where the tangent function comes from, or more specifically where all the trig functions come from. So suppose I have a right triangle and I know one of the angles. So suppose this is 30. Now once I put one of the other angles in, this triangle is going to be similar to any other triangle that is right and has a 30-degree angle because of angle-angle similarity. So what's going to be true is if I take the ratio of the corresponding sides, it's going to be the same. So suppose I know this angle, this side is 1. Well, we know this side is 3, and this side is going to be double the 1, so that's going to be 2. So if I do the ratio of the short side over the hypotenuse, I get 1/2. And if I do the ratio of the short side over the long side, I get 1 over root 3, which we can rationalize as root 3 over root 3, and we get root 3 over 3. Well, those ratios are true for any 30, 60, 90 triangle. If I change this to a 2, this would now become 2 root 3, and this now would become 4. The ratio of the short side to the hypotenuse is still 2 over 4, which is 1/2. And the ratio of the short side to the long side is still 2 over 2 root 3, which simplifies to 1 over root 3, which is what we just found, root 3 over 3. And so you notice that we get the same ratio. Well, this is not just true for a 30, 60, 90. This is true for any right triangle in which we know one of the angles. So if I have a right triangle and I know one of the angles, then I can figure out what the ratios are, and those ratios are going to be the same. So at one point, many, many years ago, someone went through and figured out what all the ratios were, and we can use those ratios to find sides of a triangle, and we can also use the ratio to find angles in a triangle if we don't know them. If we know it's a right triangle and we know the sides, we can also figure out angles. So in order to do this, we can't use words like short and long and hypotenuse. So we have to come up with a naming convention. So what we do is if I have a triangle ABC, I'm always going to do trig from one of the acute angles. So I'm going to circle an angle, I'm going to call it A. So I always imagine that I'm at A, I'm standing at A, you can only do trig at an angle. Now I can use 3 words for the sides of this triangle. I can use the word hypotenuse, opposite, or adjacent. Now the first one, hypotenuse. The hypotenuse of a triangle is the hypotenuse. It is never anything other than the hypotenuse. So that one gets labeled first. Okay. I also have the side that's opposite the angle that I'm doing the trig at. So this would be the side that's opposite. And then there's only one more side. It's the adjacent side. Now this is the one that students sometimes have a hard time with because you look and say, oh, but there's 2 adjacent sides. Well, if I always do trig from the acute angles, then one side is always going to be the hypotenuse and the other side will be adjacent. So it is basically the non-hypotenuse side that is adjacent to the angle. Okay? So if you take these 3 words, you can create ratios of sides. Okay? And there are 3 main ratios, and then you can also do the reciprocals, which we won't do. And they can create slightly different trig ratios. Okay, so we are going to do one's called tangent. We're going to do that in this section, and then sine and cosine are in the next section. Okay. So let's start with tangent. So the tangent of angle A is equal to the length of the leg that's opposite from angle A divided by the length of the leg that's adjacent to angle A. Now we can abbreviate this. We can say tangent is TAN. We know it's an angle, so you don't need the angle sign. So tangent of A is equal to the opposite side over the adjacent side. So most of the time you'll see it abbreviated like that. Tangent of A is opposite over adjacent. Now if we want to write the trig ratio, we need to figure out what angle we're talking about. They want us to do for T and U. So let's do for T first. So I'm going to circle T. So if I'm doing T, it's going to be tangent of T, and the tangent of T is going to be equal to the side that is opposite it. So 3 divided by the side that's adjacent, that's not the hypotenuse. So 4. And then if I do the tangent of U, the only thing that's going to change is my perspective. So now the side that's opposite is now 4, and the side that's adjacent is now 3. So 4 is opposite, and adjacent is the non-hypotenuse adjacent side. Notice they're just reciprocals of each other. That's always going to be true. The tangent of one angle is always equal to the tangent of its complement. It's going to be the reciprocal of it. Okay? Because of that fact that the adjacent becomes the opposite and the opposite becomes the adjacent. So we're going to do 2 problems. One where we're going to find the length of a side, and one where we're going to find the angle. Okay, you're going to need your calculator for this. So I'm going to tell you this angle is 68 degrees. And they want me to find how far away is the cliff. So the cliff is going to be from him over, so we want to find this side. Okay, so here's what I'm doing when I'm solving a problem. First thing I do is if I know an angle, I'm going to circle it. It reminds me that when I do adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse, it's got to be in relationship to that angle, since I don't know the other one. I could figure it out, but I don't know it right now. Okay, so now this side is the side that's adjacent. So I'm going to put adjacent. And the one I'm finding is the opposite, so I'm going to put opposite. So I always label 2 other sides of the triangle. I label the side I'm finding, and I label the side I know. Don't label the third side, otherwise you'll have no idea what trig function to use. Okay? So only label the side you know and the one you're finding. Okay, so opposite, adjacent, that's going to be tangent. So tangent has to be an angle, so 68 equals the side that's opposite, so that's going to be x, over the side that's adjacent, that's going to be 50. So I just write my trig ratio and fill in what I know, or if it's unknown, I put x. Now don't pick up your calculator just yet. I'm going to solve this for x, easy to do. I can multiply both sides by 50. Now, when you multiply by 50, you don't want to write it after the tangent of 68, because then it's hard to tell if you're doing the tangent of 68, that times 50, or you're doing 50 times the tangent of 68, which is what we're actually doing. So if you're going to multiply by a number, it is normally always put in front of the tangent. That way it's very clear that you're doing the tangent of 68 first, then you're going to multiply that number by 50. Okay, now here's where I'm going to finally pick up my calculator. Okay, so what I'm going to do is when you first pick up your calculator, there's one thing you should always do. Go into mode and make sure your calculator is set in degree mode. Okay? If your calculator is in radian mode, you're going to get the answer wrong every single time. Radian is a way of measuring angles in a circle in which completely around the circle is 2 pi. Okay? So it is a lot less than 360 degrees. Okay? So if you use that measurement, none of your trig ratios are going to be correct. Okay, so make sure your calculator is in degree mode. Now, one thing I do, because a lot of times I don't want to sit there and go in and hit mode every time, is I'll do a nice, easy trig function, sine of 30. I know the sine of 30 is 0.5. It's a nice, easy one. And so I just do that, and if you get 0.5, you know your calculator's in degree mode. Okay, because if it's not, if it's in radian mode, it'll give you a pretty crazy answer. Okay, so that's also a quick way just to make sure. I would never take a quiz or a test without checking to make sure my calculator's in degree mode. Okay, once I do that, now every single one of the ratios has been plugged into your calculator, stored into memory. So what I can do now is I can hit 50. So let me first show you where your buttons are. These are your sine, cosine, tangent, and this is tangent, so that's the button we're going to use. So I can hit 50, and then I can hit my tangent button, and then I got to tell it an angle, so 68 degrees, and if I hit enter, it'll tell me it's 123 feet. So 123.8. Done. Okay. Now what we're going to do next is we'll actually have the sides, and we want to find an angle. So the lengths of the sides of the triangle are given, and we want to find the measure of angle x to the nearest degree. So for this one, I am going to circle x since I'm finding x. And then what I'm going to do is, since they give me all 3 sides of the triangle, I can actually use all 3 trig functions if I wanted to. But since I only know tangent, that's the only one I know, I got to use tangent. So I am going to do opposite. This is the opposite side. And I need the adjacent, so this is adjacent. Okay, so my trig ratio is going to be tangent of x equals opposite over adjacent. Okay. And if you want to, you can reduce it, but you don't need to since you're going to be putting it in your calculator. Okay, so here's what I could do if I didn't know the cool buttons to do it. I could do 6 over 8, and it's 0.75. So this is long way. And then I could say, okay, well, what angle produces a tangent of 0.75? Okay, so then I could just sit here and play. I could do like tangent of 25. Oh, too small. Okay, let's go higher. Tangent of 30. Too small. Got to go higher. Okay, tangent of 40. Oh, too big. Smaller than that. Okay, one more. Tangent, you get the idea. Tangent of 35. Ah, getting closer. Now, nobody wants to do that. It takes forever. So if you look right above your sine, cosine, tangent buttons, you'll actually see these buttons are called inverses. You got the inverse of tangent, inverse of sine, inverse of cosine. We need to use those buttons. Those buttons will give you an angle if you tell it the ratio. So what I can do is you got to hit second to get there. You hit second, tangent, and then you tell it the ratio, and it'll tell you what angle produces that ratio. So you don't even need to simplify it. Inverse tangent of 6 over 8, and it tells me it's 36.9 degrees. So 36. And I'm done. Okay. So you use the tangent button if you know the angle and you're trying to find a side, and you use inverse tangent if you know two of the sides and you're trying to find an angle. And that is it for today's notes. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.